All right, why don't we get started then? Again, thank you so much for coming. Good evening. We're really looking forward to your helping us envision the future of the R3 district here in Mountain View. First off, let's get some technical details out of the way. We have interpretation tonight available in both Spanish and Chinese. You can find that by pushing the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. It'll show up fairly soon here. But first, I'll take a moment to let our interpreters direct people to those language channels. Elena, if you could, please.
Muchas gracias. Queremos dejarles saber que esta noche va a haber interpretación al español disponible. Si es que lo ocupa en español, por favor, oprima el icono que dice interpretación y seleccione el idioma español. Gracias.
And Ivy, thank you so much.
晚上好，大家可以单击屏幕底部的口译 interpretation 的图标，选择中文以该语言收听会议。如果口译不够或有任何问题，可以在我们休息时寻求帮助。为此，您可以点击举手的图标来表达您的问题，或要求进一步澄清。谢谢。
Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate your help. So please keep yourself muted during the presentation. We will have an opportunity for Q&A afterward. Please, we will, if you are interested in Q&A, click the raise hand button, which is available on the Zoom app. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand with the *9. After the presentation, we're going to have group discussions to talk about some key questions related to the project. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself and the project team. I'm Eric Anderson, I'm Advanced Planning Manager. We're also joined by our consultants, Opticos Design, including Stefan Pellegrini, Tony Perez, Beth Sushan, Russell Toller, and Roger Foreman. And lastly, we have support from other Community Development Department staff, including Edgar Maravilla, Ellen Yao, Rebecca Shapiro, and Krisha Panolia. You will have a chance to meet some of them later on in the evening in the breakout groups. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get input on the R3 zoning update. This project is an action in the Council's strategic roadmap and part of a priority to help create housing options in the city. This meeting is focused on the Loma, Farley, Rock Street neighborhood. Future workshops will focus on other neighborhoods. Tonight's workshop will include 3 parts. There'll be a presentation overview of where we've been with the project and some options for where we can go. Then we will go into breakout groups to hear from each other about your thoughts on each option. And lastly, there will be a report back. The R3 zoning update is only part of the city's interconnected housing programs. In addition, the city is preparing the housing element, which is a state requirement to plan for more housing and to address housing equity. Council direction was to not rely on the R3 update to accommodate those the units required from the housing element. A draft of the housing element is under review by the state now, and we expect it to be adopted by the end of the year. We're also preparing a displacement response strategy. This could include affordable unit replacement and tenant relocation requirements, as well as preservation efforts. The displacement response strategy is under review and would apply to the R3 zone with or without this zoning update. Lastly, we are preparing a middle income strategy, which will include an increasing portfolio of middle income ownership and rental units and home ownership assistance. The R3 update would help support this strategy by creating more middle income units. The R3 zone covers much of the city and almost all of its multifamily row house and HOA developments today. It includes a range of development standards, including 3-story height limit and limits on floor area ratios, setbacks, minimum open area. The maximum density varies across the district, but the general standards of FAR setbacks and open area and others apply everywhere similarly in the zone. Recently, almost all development has led to expensive row homes, a few recent examples of which are shown here. It's also important to note that state density bonus applies to R3 today, which could result in buildings more than 3 stories and other waivers of development standards, such as slot coverage or setbacks. So why update the zoning? The city is looking into a form-based approach. This means that the standards focus on the form of the building rather than its contents. For example, a building with more small units would be treated the same as a building with fewer large units. This has several benefits. The current framework of densities don't really address neighborhood conditions. Through a zoning code update, we can locate higher densities near transit or services and modulate character defining standards, such as floor area ratio, setbacks, open area, and so on, to reflect changes in density. Changes to standards can also help create a broad range of unit types, including more stacked flats, which can be relatively more affordable than row homes and other product types. Lastly, with a form-based approach and by calibrating standards to each other, we can create more flexibility while simultaneously creating more predictability and streamlining the approval process. It also needs to be noted that there is a state law in effect that says we cannot reduce residential density or increase constraints on residential density. Some growth can occur, and your input can help inform how much. Before we get too much further, we should define some terms. We're going to be using house scale to refer to separate buildings along a block, usually up to about 80 feet wide. They can include multiple units and are generally up to about 2 to 3 stories. Block scale refers to buildings that are attached or very close to each other along the full length of a block. So with that out of the way, let's take a quick poll. The purpose of this poll is to get an understanding of the stakeholders at this meeting. This way we can see if we need to target any missed groups later on. So I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, look, we can see everybody, and I'm going to start this poll. So the poll should be pretty straightforward, but you can respond to what your relationship is to the Monta, Loma, Farley, Rock neighborhood. For example, do you rent? Do you own your home? Do you own property but don't live there? Do you work or own a business? Or none of the above? Okay. Looks like just about everybody has responded. Should be pretty quick. Oh, one more there. All right, I think that's plenty of time here. So it looks like we have about 60% of you are homeowners in the Monta, Loma, Farley, Rock neighborhood. So definitely the majority there, about 30% none of the above, and about a little less than or 16% renters. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go back to the slides here. So now let's get into what we've heard so far. Earlier this year, we went out and talked to a few different stakeholder groups and heard a few key messages. For example, some wanted more housing, others were more cautious about growth. Some wanted to plan for growth, but within precise plans or general plan updates. I heard a lot of ensuring that infrastructure, parks, and schools can support growth. Also, desire to create better access to retail services and amenities, focusing housing near transit, consider mobility and streetscapes as you're designing projects, protect privacy and greenery, especially trees. Some wanted lower parking requirements, others wanted to minimize neighborhood parking impacts. Certainly heard concern about reflecting all opinions and don't hide the downsides of possible options or where we are today. And of course, protect people from displacement and rent increases is a major concern. So in response to that, those discussions, we've prepared an alternative that seeks to address what we've heard in those discussions. This is an alternative to what Council reviewed back in 2021. And we've got 5 main ideas here. First, focusing subdistricts on differences in scale and character rather than height. The 2020 approach that we had that we presented to Council back in 2021, we developed a growth framework that essentially maximized development capacity. Council reviewed this in 2021 and directed staff to get more community input, which is why we're doing this today. The framework included these subdistricts, which ranged from 2 up to 6 stories. So rather than focusing on differences in height, we could alternatively focus on differences of scale and character. So here's some images that show how that could look. So an alternative framework could have lower intensity districts be more house scale and higher intensity districts could be more block scale. These are some alternative districts. So later in the presentation, we can look at a map of where these districts could go. We've also put some thought into transitions of height and scale to existing neighborhoods. These pictures show how smaller building scales, including height, width, and depth, can help buildings fit better into the community, despite small setbacks, 3 or 4 story to 1 or 2 story transitions. In addition, we've revised the proposed R3 map and eliminated cases where higher intensity subzones would be added adjacent to lower density neighborhoods. The lower intensity subzones could have new standards limiting scale, both facing the street and along internal property lines. In addition, privacy and screening concerns can be addressed through landscaping. A form-based set of standards can help support improved pedestrian connections and streetscapes by encouraging connections to the sidewalk and comfortable walking environment. Publicly accessible open space can also be provided through incentives. If developers are allowed to build the same amount of building through allowance of an extra floor, for example, new public parks become a win-win where the community can benefit from the additional open space. The R3 zone could also be an opportunity for small neighborhood serving goods and services, which increases the vibrancy and walkability of the city's neighborhoods. As I said earlier, the 2020 growth framework essentially maximized development capacity. The new alternative map would focus development capacity increases in strategic locations, resulting in a smaller increase to overall development capacity in the R3 zone. In addition, R1 and R2 neighborhoods are only adjacent to R3A or R3B. At the same time, we're targeting higher intensities to key destinations like transit and services. So just to orient you to this map, you can see the R3B area, which is a little bit darker, close to downtown, which is in the bottom, the southeast corner of this map. That's where the downtown transit center is. Loma Shopping Center is here at the corner of Middlefield and Rengstorff. The former Mayfield, the Google office here is here on this corner of the map. So hopefully that helps orient you to where key features are in this map. This is the Bailey Park Shopping Center here at the corner of Montecito and Shoreline, which goes here north along the edge of the neighborhood. As you can see, we focused most of the areas to be R3A in this map, but areas that are closer to services and transit are slightly higher at R3B. So that summarizes our alternative approach. Tonight, you'll have an opportunity to respond to these ideas. In your breakout groups, you can discuss these questions. What do you like in the examples of buildings? What don't you like? Where could they be appropriate? Where should pedestrian and bicycle users be prioritized? Where would you support allowing small neighborhood serving commercial uses? What do you like better about the 2022 map or the 2020 map? And what other ideas do you have? And in closing, I'd just like to make it clear that this is not an all or nothing approach. Form-based principles, neighborhood commercial, and open space can move forward with the 2020 map, and we can use parts of the 2020 framework and parts of the 2022 framework. Lastly, you may have other ideas that we haven't thought of yet. But before we go to our breakout groups, I'm sure some of you have questions. I'd love to take an opportunity to answer some of those questions, maybe for the next 10 minutes or so, before going to the breakout groups. So let me stop sharing and we can answer some questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and hit the raise hand button on your in your Zoom, and we'll, I believe Beth will call on you, right, Beth?
Yes, I'll keep track and make sure everyone gets their time.
And for folks who are participating by phone, you should be able to dial *9 to raise your hand. So anyone by phone can do so by dialing *9.
Okay, we'll start with Sherry and then G. Harley.
I'm just wondering if consideration has been given in terms of the use of space for commercial property, the changes in behavior because of COVID, and whether we have the ability to really sustain commercial property in neighborhoods these days the way we used to.
That's a great question. That is something that we can continue to study through the process, through this zoning process. We're really early in the stages of kind of brainstorming alternatives, and those are the kinds of ideas that we can continue to analyze and bring forward to council in the future. So that's a great question.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. And next we'll have G. Harley.
Yeah, hi. Wondering what is the allowable stories for the large and medium density housing in the new plan?
So it's an alternative framework for looking at the R3 zone. It's certainly not a plan at this point. The base number of stories would be 3 stories for all 3 options, similar to what it is today. There could be opportunities to increase that based on provision of commercial, provision of open space. We are limited, as I said, under state law of reducing what developers are allowed to do from what they're allowed to do today. So for example, adding commercial, we couldn't reduce the residential amount based on the amount of commercial that they'd be adding. So, and then of course, there's also density bonus, which is something that we do expect people to take advantage of both today and in the future. So that could result certainly in more than 3 stories in many instances.
Okay, so next we'll have Jessica, and then we did have a hand up for Ilya, but option for that person to speak after Jessica, and then we'll have Patrice.
Hi, I have 2 questions. Firstly, there was a mention earlier about that developers could use like extra allocations for the height. If you could explain that a little more, if that can be done in any of the zones.
Well, I think it could be. That's exactly the kind of input that we'd want to hear from you about things like where is height more of a sensitive issue, where is it less of a sensitive issue in terms of trade-offs of commercial versus an open space versus allowing additional height for those provisions. Where is it more important to limit heights? So I would say that at this stage in the process, it's nothing that we've set in stone, and those are exactly the types of considerations that we want to hear your input on.
Thanks. And my second question is, in the context of adding or updating these R3 plans, has the city identified any new park space yet, or where they, plan to put a large park for this planning area?
No, we haven't, although that could be something that we could do through the R3 process. We'd have to look at, large enough sites that could be able to dedicate a park as part of a development, or other opportunities for the city to buy land. We do have, community services department process for that. They're also kicking off very soon the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan. And a big part of the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan is identifying areas where parks are necessary in the community.
Thanks.
Okay, so Ilya, if you'd like to speak up, then you definitely can. Otherwise, we'll go to Patrice. Okay, go ahead, Patrice. Pardis, sorry, you can introduce yourself.
Oh, I didn't recognize that was my name. Yeah, so my question was, I'm wondering if the city has done any sort of feasibility analysis or sort of extra capacity unlocked analysis on the new alternative. I know one of the original motivations for the R3 update was to not get those, net loss type of projects where a grandfathered in apartment complex from long ago would get replaced with a bunch of townhomes and with reduced total number of homes. I know you mentioned that displacement is a separate thing and not included in this, but given that, I'm curious if this new lower intensity map is still going to address that issue. And if it represents feasible projects.
Yeah, so feasible projects are really highly dependent on what's there today. And I think one of the characteristics of R3 is that, every property is something a little bit different. There's a lot of diversity in the zone today. So it's very hard to anticipate what is going to be feasible on any current condition in R3. We have not done any feasibility analyses on any new standards. We haven't gone so far as to even develop standards. Again, this is an opportunity to get community input on what was presented back in 2021 to council and have an option to kind of compare it to. There are plenty of ways that this direction can accommodate more overall units. One is by taking a form-based approach, which is less focused on the number of units in a building. Another is by addressing some of the standards that have been shown to be most constraining development, standards like open area and setbacks. And so there are ways that we can add to the overall number of units that are provided within a different kind of framework of kind of how we look at different buildings in different intensity zones.
So to stick to our 10-minute timeline, we're going to cap it after these next two questions. So we'll have Vivek go last, and Mr. One, would you be able to go next?
Yeah, my name is Bill Lambert. You could change, the moderator could change my name to Bill Lambert. I'd appreciate it. I have two questions, one, both very high level. What is the overall objective of R3 zoning? What are we trying to accomplish? What problem is trying to be solved? What's the goal here?
So the goal for the project is to facilitate more middle-income units, more diversity of unit types, and to update the standards, which really only are, which really reflect a development type or a series of development types that haven't happened in a long time, or really just result in row houses. So either the garden style apartments that you see on California Street or row houses. That's really what the R3 results in. We also have this opportunity to better address neighborhood conditions, better address access to transit and services, And so really those are the goals of the project.
Okay, next one's a really tough question. Simple to ask, but tough to answer, but do your best. On average, what is the increase in density for R3 housing?
Well, I mean, we have a number of different scenarios that we can look at, right?
So let's give a range, all right? Maybe that's the best way to do it.
Right. So under the scenarios of the alternatives that are shown today, if you have a site that's fairly built out, like it was, it's built at near the maximum of what is allowed today, there may not be much additional units that you could build unless they're, again, we haven't done the standards yet, so we don't know exactly, is it a doubling of units? We don't know. It's too difficult to say. Under the previous options, the ones that went up to 8 stories, there was certainly a lot of potential capacity, or went up to 6 stories. There was certainly a lot of potential capacity, even on sites that are fairly built out. However, there are a number of R3 sites today that are not very built out. And those are certainly opportunity sites to fill in density in places where, maybe there's 1 or 2 units on the site, maybe 3, and allowing a kind of typical multifamily structure on those sites could add a significant number.
Yeah, so that's an important question to know the answer to, because infrastructure needs to be planned to support that, whatever growth that is. And that infrastructure needs to be put in place before the buildings, or as the building happens, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And certainly as part of this process, we're going to go through that analysis to see how many units might result and what the infrastructure needs are for those units.
Okay, thank you for your questions. And last we'll have Vivek.
Thank you so much. And I have a 2-part question. So I saw the area that's been marked as R3, potentially marked as R3. And one of those areas is where we have our only walkable retail, which is the Safeway. So the first part of the question is, how do we make sure that if there is R3, this vertical development happening there, those retail options are preserved? So that was the first part. The second part was, and I'm sure everyone on the planning side is aware of that, the only walkable city-owned park is Thaddeus Park for the residents of Monta, Loma, which is, I believe, 0.2 acres. And I'm sure, folks on the planning side know what the city guidelines are, as well as the state guidelines are, for a certain number of people. We are, it's supposed to be what, 3 acres per 1,000 residents. We're not even approaching that. So how do you think, being planners, it is ethical to put in additional density without addressing this basic infrastructure and, parts that infrastructure, needs of the community? Thank you.
Well, I'll address the first question. So yes, the R3 zone does ring the Monta Loma Shopping Center, but it does not, it doesn't encroach on the Monta Loma Shopping Center. We're not proposing to rezone the Monta Loma Shopping Center to R3. If you look at the map, it is a white spot in the middle of the R3 zone. So it's not under consideration today. I think your second point is great. I'll say it's maybe a rhetorical question. I think it's the type of question or the type of point that we really want to hear. There are a lot of different values that can enter into this discussion in terms of planning for infrastructure versus, addressing a current need for housing. And we want to hear where the community lies on that spectrum. So certainly make that point in your breakout rooms, and we love to hear it and compile it and present all of this input to council.
So the part of, so I found your comment rather interesting when you talk about values. There are areas of Mountain View which are which have a severe deficit of park space. And guess what? Those are the areas where you are putting R3 zoning and higher density. There are areas of Mountain View which may not be perfect, which have got like 2 acres per 1,000 residents, which are on the other side of the tracks. And we're on the wrong side of the tracks, clearly. And you're talking about values. You're talking about, taking areas which are already park deprived and adding density there. Is that what you call values?
Again, I mean, I'm sure there will be some great discussion in your breakout groups on this very topic. I think it's exactly the type of thing that we want to hear and report up to council. So thank you. Okay, so that ends the questions. Thank you so much. I think we're ready now to jump into breakout groups. It looks like there are 52 participants, and I think there are probably about 14 or so people that are leading this thing. So that's about 35. So I think what we're going to do is 5 breakout groups, and just go from there. So Krisha, go ahead and send us into our groups. Seems like people are starting to come back. We had some great conversations in our group. Hope everybody else did too. We'll wait a couple more minutes for people to finish up their discussions, and then I think we'll have about 15 minutes or so to share thoughts from each group. Maybe we'll do about 3 or 4 minutes per group. Share a couple of main thoughts that folks had in their discussions. And then we'll just kind of remind people of the next steps of the project, and we'll let you all go to bed. I want to thank everybody again for coming out tonight. I'm sure you're all busy. Just great to have so many people engaged and joining in on this conversation. So thank you so much.
Never too busy for you, Eric.
And that's saying a lot from Robert Cox. Well, it looks like I think everybody's back from the breakout rooms. Just want to say thanks again for all of your contributions and for joining us tonight. Why don't we go through, spend about 4 minutes with each group and ask somebody from each group to present some of the major things that you all talked about. So Tony and Ellen's group, does somebody want to present from there?
Yeah, Ellen, you were doing a great job taking notes there. Or just ask you to hit the high points, please.
Sure, thank you. So from group 1, we talked about the different scales. I think a lot of the concerns is that the transition points between R1, R2, and R3 zones. People want to ensure that there's enough setbacks, especially if you're increasing height, that there's additional setbacks. People are interested, preferring not to have like long blank walls, any way to break up the wall plane with features like balconies or porches. They want to make sure that there's enough solar access to make sure that the additional height doesn't block out backyards of adjacent property owners. People did have concerns about displacement, which is outside of R3, but that came up as well. Again, breaking up super blocks with, pedestrian walkways or any open space. Interest in planting more mature trees on day one of the development. And then limiting commercial areas to select locations that currently have commercial and not introducing new commercial. Wouldn't want to change the look and feel of existing just all residential neighborhoods. And then interest in, the type of commercial that would go in, the scale of the use, like a small shop versus a larger retail space. And then for the last one, I guess we had kind of some thoughts on more larger scale site planning access over the railroad tracks and to other neighborhoods. So the pedestrian access ways would be important to cross over railroads or the larger streets like Ringstorff. And that concludes most of our comments, unless Tony has anything to add.
Yeah, just one. So Eric and everyone, we spent a lot of time discussing how density bonus is something the city can't prevent. And that this effort of updating the R3 is trying to make things more predictable and maybe make the density bonus not necessary, but all the same, the density bonus cannot be prevented. And so we spent a lot of time discussing that. So just, for everyone.
Great, thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thank you so much. So how about Russell and Rebecca's group?
So our group had a bunch of different priorities. One of the key points of feedback we heard was general support for the 2022 approach, with support for higher intensities closer to Caltrain. We also heard strong support for walkable, small neighborhood serving commercial uses, with some desire to hear more detail on what that might include and how it might be appropriately done. There was a fair amount of discussion about improved pedestrian connections, and in particular sort of sustainable and green pedestrian connections. There was more generalized support for improving connectivity within the neighborhood and to other locations like the downtown. And I think those were some of the bigger picture areas of consensus.
Awesome, thank you both so much. How about Roger and Krisha's group?
Krisha, did you want to summarize?
Sure, I can do a quick summary. So our group found that they supported the old plan, the 2020 approach, as they wished that the new approach did more to increase density. In terms of the map that was shown, they did identify areas that they thought could have more density, and those included areas near Shoreline, Middlefield, Ringstorff, and near 101 as well. Near the end, there was also some discussion on parking. Our group thought that the city should incentivize and improve pedestrian and bicycle routes, so that would result in reduced parking. And other things the group touched on is priority of open space areas and having street trees in some of the street trees in the streetscape. Do you think I'm missing anything else, Roger? Are there key points?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And how about Martine and Edgar's group?
Edgar, would you like to summarize?
Yeah, I can summarize. Just feel free to chime in if I miss anything. But let me bring up my notes here. We did have a discussion, and to be honest, a lot of the discussion revolved around existing infrastructures in the area and whether or not they can possibly sustain the increase and the possible growth of more units in the area. That topic consistently came up. We also discussed ensuring more connectivity between the communities that currently exist out there and the existing sites, such as the Safeway area, and there appears to be other shopping centers within that area. Keep in mind parks and open space, an open space requirement. We also touched upon displacement and the possibility of displacement, specifically smaller, denser, less dense projects that may become a little bit more dense and in the process may displace some community members. And comments around where to put more density revolved around more of the major thoroughfares and intersections in the area that may be areas that can accommodate more of the growth. And we did have one comment highlighting to improve the opportunity to make more units in general. And then also a few comments about this is a very unique community, and some members feel it's appropriate as it is currently and would prefer not to see change. Martine, am I missing anything on there?
I think that's it. Stefan, do you have any comments to share with the group?
Just maybe a sort of few more specific things. There was some discussion about the appropriateness of greater intensity in the vicinity of some of the corridors, particularly Rangsdorf. There was some discussion about whether the area around Plymouth would be appropriate for greater intensity. There was also a comment about making sure that the neighborhood provided strong pedestrian paths and connections, particularly to Google as sort of the major job center in the area, and some discussion about whether or not that could be prioritized. That's all.
Great. Thank you so much, all three of you, for leading that group. Sounds excellent. And Beth, our group, we had some great conversations. Do you think you can summarize a little bit?
Definitely. Okay. So we were a group that really advocated for greenery. So you'll hear that theme, and as well as other items. So first, wanted to make sure that setbacks were large enough, especially in the rear, in order that there could be a backyard. And the need for parks. Wanted for the transitions to include balconies, especially because it can benefit livability. And noted that they did not like the San Antonio Center. We need to make the space between buildings more functional. So for example, alleys or paths should be able to let people cross through. In terms of along the street, there should be more greenery and there should be inviting places for people to meet and be. Architecture is really, really important, and it can make buildings more unique. So they enjoyed Park Place because it's very walkable and it fosters community and is a great place to meet. And then there were actually quite a few opinions on increasing stories in exchange for open space. So potentially not increasing or intentionally relocating stories, or just allowing more stories. If commercial is allowed, it should be more small place and more frequent use shops, like something that people would want to visit in their personal lives, like bagel shops or small bookstores. And finally, we do support bike access and just want to make sure that there's accessibility for people with limited mobility. And as a final point, it would be really nice if smaller buildings could also be inexpensive, specifically bungalows. So Eric, do you have anything to add?
No, that sounds great. I mean, certainly there was a lot more that came up. We're going to have summaries of all of these groups and the notes that we took. You know, the themes, some of the commonalities, and we're going to be able to kind of compile all of those points and put them together. We'll be able to post a lot of that information on the website. You know, maybe not immediately. It's going to take some time for us to kind of pull that information together. But yeah, those are the groups. Again, I want to thank everybody. Before you leave, we have a couple of more announcements. I'll bring up the slide again. So first of all, the mountainview.gov/R3 zoning update website, which I'm sure you're all aware of. It was on all of your postcards and on the flyer and everything like that. That's our main city website for the R3 zoning update. In the next couple of days, we're going to start posting links to ways to provide additional information on these topics through this website. So if you feel like you had more to say, or if you have a neighbor that couldn't make it, let them know, or please log on to this website and you'll be able to find a way to navigate to a tool to provide comments on these topics, further comments on these topics. So please check that out. And then after this outreach, which we're going to carry on, you know, we're going to continue these neighborhood workshops, and we're going to do more outreach via the website through the end of 2022. After that, we're going to draft some framework options to present to the EPC and council in early 2023. And we're expecting adoption in late 2023 or early 2024. So that concludes our presentation. And again, we're really grateful for you to come out tonight and hang out and provide your viewpoints. And please stay involved. Feel free to contact me if you have any other questions through the website or my email, and happy to continue this conversation with everybody. I can hang out for a few more minutes if you have any more questions. I can maybe answer one question from anybody who, one question from each person, not like long conversations, but for a little bit I can hang out if there are any lingering questions. So again, thanks again and have a great night.
Hey, Eric, will the notes pages be made public at all?
So we're going to be cleaning them up. We're going to have to synthesize these comments. Let's see. Has Tony left? I think Tony has left, and Stefan. You know what? We will. The information will certainly be available in one form or another in the next few weeks. Whether it's going to be these notes pages exactly as we wrote them down, you know, we may have to clean them up a little bit, clean up the information a little bit.
Okay.
But the information will be available.
Thanks.
Robert?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, you used to have that interactive map up there, and now it looks like we saw Monta Loma, you know, 2020 and 2022. Are you coming up with a 2022 interactive map, or are you going to be showing like the contrast between the two by neighborhood? And, you know, when will we be able to see this for different neighborhoods, or are they only going to be, is it going to be kind of like only a reveal in the night of, you know, the particular workshop?
So we are going to be kind of presenting the information each night of the workshop. The idea is to really kind of help frame the information for people as they're digesting the maps. We will have the opportunity to provide comments through the website. If you want to think about the maps a little bit more, or now that you've seen them, you want to, you have any further thoughts, go ahead and use the website to provide additional comments.
But will any maps be available before the meetings for particular neighborhoods?
No, we're going to be unveiling the maps with each neighborhood.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You bet. Bill?
Yeah, I'm going to be asking this about all of the plans that the city's considering. And I don't know quite how to put it, but I'll try to say it as best I can. So that is, we can come up with good plans about how we want things to go, R3, zoning, various designs, trade-offs, and things like that. But for a lot of the things I think we want as a community, the in lieu fees are not going to be sufficient, the developer fees, certainly not for the affordable housing component. And therefore, there will be need to be some public investment to make our plans workable and livable. Are part of the R3 zoning plans dealing with financing and funding strategies for, call them public benefits?
So it's not part of our discussion right now. If that's something that you want to advocate for including, then by all means continue.
I would definitely advocate for including, because it puts boundary conditions sort of on. I think it helps the community understand even more what the trade-offs are. I mean, we can want anything we want, but if it's not financially feasible, we have to be more creative then.
Right. So we do have a number of different funding strategies that are part of, say, the Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan, where the housing element has a range of funding strategies in it. And we have funding strategies associated with our affordable housing programs. So they're all interconnected depending on what the desired outcome is. The R3 project is really focused on, nuts and bolts of zoning. And so in terms of any other kind of public good that you're interested in seeing how we're paying for it, by all means, keep involved in those other processes.
I'll write you a letter. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Jessica.
I just want to second what Bill said. I thought that was really thoughtful that, we're making these zoning updates under certain assumptions. We talked a lot about improving bike and transit paths and whatnot. But if planning for the funding strategies isn't done in conjunction with it, I hope we're not left short, or the outcome isn't what we'd intended it to be, because we hadn't been thoughtful up front about how we're going to fund changes due to our R3 zoning. So yeah, I just wanted to second that.
Great. It's a great comment. Thank you. Sherry.
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways this is a little outside the scope, but in addition to funding strategies, so the more density we have, the worse traffic is going to get, especially when we're building them on the main corridors. And it's already a nightmare on San Antonio. So if we don't have a regional transit system that really works for people, we're going to continue to have a really serious problem with this balance of traffic congestion and more housing. And somehow all these plans have to come together in unity to make this work.
Yeah. Well, certainly transportation is another key issue, that the city's working on through a number of different transportation plans in the Public Works Department. It's a great comment. I think we all are frustrated with our regional public transit system. It doesn't have very much coverage and it's fairly slow. And so, thinking there are regional programs going on, MTC, Plan Bay Area, which are identifying kind of moonshot improved public transit systems. And so, that's one thing that you can kind of look into, and certainly things that the city's paying attention to as well. But the great comment. Artists.
I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if the folks making comments about funding strategies for parks are aware that any new development has to pay a park in lieu fee. Just wanted to bring that up.
So we're well aware of that, but it's not enough to buy $10 million an acre for park space or open space, or the in lieu fees are insufficient. Okay, I just.
Okay, well, this is great. I love the idea of people having these conversations. Continue to have these conversations amongst yourselves and at these R3 meetings. Again, really appreciate your time tonight. 9:01, ending right on time. Again, thank you so much and have a great night. And I hope to hear from all you all in the future and continuing on. So thanks again.